So before we get into this mini episode, we have a few things to throw at you guys. Our guest, Alanna, is full of passion and a shit ton of information, intense stories, and a call to action regarding a cold case that needs to be solved. And she's also a frickin' peach.
Mm-hmm.
So this episode's a little bit different because it's basically an interview, but there are a few extra edits and details redacted to respect wishes of families in the sharing of these stories. This is me and my obvious need for approval, but don't mind the sound, you guys, because we had to switch up our recording space to properly social distance with a guest because we're not going to sit in a tiny little room and get
glass long with each other.
Okay, we always put them in the show notes, but trigger warnings big time for rape and murder. And we would let you guys know that this episode isn't going to be funny, but I feel like that just opens us up for, oh, wait, the other ones are supposed to be funny? And I can't handle it. Boo-doo-boo-boo, intermish. Holy shit, these are real life SVU episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. And don't listen if you don't want, you fucking prick. Jeez. Go.
Welcome to SVU Pod, Especially Heinous. I'm Tasha.
I'm Gabe.
And we're still in our intermish. Nobody can see you shaking your head at me. They all know you're doing it. So.
Hold on, Marty's.
Okay.
She had a drink of water while she's farting.
She was like.
Your fart noises ever since I've known you have always made me laugh like a fucking
That was a good fart noise.
like a
that was pretty
5-year-old.
good.
Thanks, you guys.
Yeah. I always worry, like, if I make a fart noise, like, it's just not going to be, like, fully executed, and you're just, like, a bad fart noise, and it's just embarrassing.
Do you know my first thought when she said your fart noises? And I'm like, oh my God, please don't call out that mine aren't indicative of normal people's farts. No. And so it's going to be like, ew, your farts are weird.
No.
Please, God, no.
No, they sound like a real fart. You've done a good job.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh.
That could be the worst thing I've heard all day if somebody says that to me. I want to hear your fart noise now that you're like worried. Now that you're worried about it.
I don't even. Too much pressure. I just told you I'm nervous about it.
But like we can't see your mouth, so
yeah.
Okay.
Just, we won't even make eye contact.
Now I'm gonna get all my spit on the.
That's fine.
That's what that thing's there for.
Okay.
Yeah, do it.
See, it's not good. It's not good.
It's a good one.
Oh,
I thought it was great.
You guys, yeah.
Yeah, that's
God.
a good one. That's a classic.
I think you guys are just being nice.
Today, we have our first guest ever. Her name is Alanna, and she is a victims advocate and the creator of a Facebook group and page called Buried Cold Cases. The group was started back in September of 2019 and now has over 85,000 members.
Holy shit.
Yeah. Buried Cold Cases was originally created to focus on the names and stories of little known and rarely discussed murder victims and missing persons cases rather than the high profile cases that always get discussed. Cases may be only a year old or as old as 50 or more years old. Alanna will make write-ups of cases she has come across in her own research, and other members in the Buried Cold Case group are encouraged to share cases they have come across or their own loved ones' cold cases. Alanna's also going to school for journalism with hopes to become a journalist that helps to respectfully cover crime and cold cases in the future.
Cool.
Yeah. So, hi, Alanna.
Hi, guys. Hi, everyone.
Thanks for being here. Alanna's brought us a story that she has worked on. But before we get started on that, could you maybe fill us in a little bit on the important work that you're doing and how you got there?
Sure. Well, thank you guys for having me on. I was always into true crime from kind of a young age, ID channel, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, dude.
Perfect.
Yeah. You know, start out with that.
One of us.
Yes.
One of us.
You know, I didn't actually watch that much Dateline, but I really like Dateline now. But,
Yeah.
you know, I think that was what had started it off for me of, you know, watching the ID channel, seeing the stories. I wanted to be a detective, but then I found out that you have to be a police officer and be on like the streets and that for many years and before you can actually do that. And that did not sound as appealing to me. You know, I kind of didn't really know where to go from there. Actually, I had, he's now my fiance, but I had met him about like 6 years ago. And I would watch the shows on ID, and he wasn't able to watch that. And I had found out pretty early on that his mother was actually murdered. And so that was kind of part of the reason he didn't want to watch that stuff, because he had lived it growing up and having to go through a trial and everything. And I can get into that too, a little bit more about that story, because that is definitely the biggest part, I think, of my story of coming to here, to this place of, you know, trying to be a victim's advocate and working with, you know, some of these cases and in whatever capacity I can. firsthand. At first, I didn't really, I mean, I understood, but I didn't get like why he wasn't able to watch those shows or even come in the room, and I'd have to shut it off. So I took a break from watching that kind of stuff, especially once I'd heard more about the story of his mother. And then I found myself a couple years ago, it's probably more like a year and a half ago, there was a local case, a mysterious death case rather than like a clear-cut murder or suicide, that sort of thing. And I had reached out to the father of the person that had died, and I was like, what do you think about putting this on Facebook to get some more attention and be able to share it? Because he was sharing stuff on his personal Facebook page about it, but he wasn't having people share it because it wasn't like a public format. I was like, what if you were just putting the things you were writing on your personal Facebook and then putting that on like a public page? They were all for it. We had some other ideas as well on how to use like ad targeting, where you'd pay for ads to target this specific area where it happened.
Every one of us older people needs a young person to be like, hey, why don't you do this thing that everybody's doing? It's like, well, I put an ad in the paper. What more can I do?
I had the idea originally, and then there is somebody that by the name of Billy Jensen who he kind of does this. He specializes in it, and I had looked up an article that had him featured in it about how he was using like targeted Facebook ads to actually help solve murders. So I was like, I guess it's not that crazy of an idea. So we did it, and it was a page for that one, and it blew up pretty quickly, got a lot of support. It was helpful. We did get a couple new leads that had come in.
Oh, that's so awesome.
It was really exciting.
So you are a detective.
Well, not no.
She came in with a trench coat and a magnifying glass, and I was like, oh my God.
It's really cool that you've created a platform that creates more attention for these like cold cases.
So we were able to get some new leads for this specific case. The boy was local to here, but it had happened in a different state. So that was kind of the limitation of his father being able to get some new leads, and how we were able to use the Facebook page to help us with that. It wasn't enough to open the case back up. They had already closed it and ruled it a suicide, even though there were some really sketchy things on there. That's still running and active, not able to do that much with it. That's kind of the decision we came to, and we felt good about it. I didn't want his father to be overly involved if he didn't want to be in that.
Yeah, that's got to be super overwhelming.
I think it was for him too, because it was constantly, as we were doing it, it was like reliving that. And so I totally understood where he was coming from. So this is not my current group that I do. This was a separate page that had kind of got me into and kind of show me like what Facebook was able to do, that I could use the tool of social media to do something good with it.
Yeah.
And then in September, I was kind of getting like itchy to do something else again. So I was like, you know what? I've created pages before. I've now created a group. Like, let's see what this is about. Maybe this is like could be a cool experiment. So I started out, and I invited like one person, and he was his son has been missing since the late 80s, and I'm friends with him on Facebook, and I invited him because I at one point wanted to feature his son's story. And from there, I kind of like shared a couple posts that I'd made of like write-ups of cases that I'd been researching for a while, and it started taking off like right away. It just started blowing up really quickly, and I think we had like 10,000 people by the end of the month, or within like 2 weeks or something like that. I can't quite remember. It just seems like it just kept growing and growing, and it just was becoming this big thing. There are a lot of family members of murdered or missing loved ones on there. I've gotten to know some of them, and get to tell stories. We'd have people reach out to the group and be like, will you write a story about my daughter, my son, my mother? With the time that we had, I did my best to try to write those stories. I did bring on like a couple different writers at the end of December or like the beginning of January. So we had a couple of their stories, of what they've written as well. It's been a really good experience. I felt like I was able to just help tell some stories that really hadn't been told for a long time. And it was a real privilege that the family members would trust me with it. They'd give me information, or they'd give me articles, then I do my own research just to get some of the information and as many details as I could about the case, and then condense it down to something that people would read on social media and share.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, that is. It's crazy.
Yeah, and it's a lot of work. It's time consuming. It's really rewarding. I went back to school back in the beginning of this year. So that made it a little bit harder for me to to be able to devote as much time as I wanted to it. Just retouch on some of the stories that I told from before that maybe didn't get as much attention and just like reshare it. I'll go back and touch on my now fiance's mother is like a really big part of why I decided to go back to school, why I decided to do the group page or really, anything that I'm doing in this genre. I wanted to help victims and their families because I feel like somebody has to do something. Some of these people that have reached out to the page, they want somebody to tell their loved one's story. They want to know they're not forgotten. And I think just, whether it gets like 100 shares or 500 shares, it's just the fact that like somebody would take the time and try to put it out there and that people are reading about their loved one and that they're not forgotten about. Because obviously they've not forgotten about their loved one, but sometimes they can feel like detectives or the media or the town that had happened in, that it's just they moved on and they're kind of stuck waiting like without any answers. My fiance's mother, she was assaulted and murdered when he was just a baby. This was down in Oklahoma. It was in Norman, Oklahoma, which is kind of like a sort of suburb city of Oklahoma City. It was during like the middle of the day.
The middle of the day?
Yeah, it was the middle of the day.
Was she like a stay-at-home mom?
I think she was at the time. She had her master's degree, I believe, in communication, but I think he was pretty young. He was about 8 months old at the time. So he was just, I think she was staying at home because, to take care of him. My fiance, he was in the other room sleeping. She had essentially the man that he was later caught. He used to be like a utility worker. So
you are describing my fucking nightmares.
Yeah,
but anyway,
like,
keep going.
No, that's okay. It's my nightmares as well. It makes me emotional to talk about it too because it's, we've visited her grave and it's just, anyway, back on the story. He still had his uniform. He'd been recently fired from his job. I believe he was like a telephone cable worker, that sort of guy, cable guy. And he had used his uniform to try to get into the house. He had been at their house previously for actual cable work there. And, he had given her the creeps at that point and then came back, I believe it was a couple months later, said he had to do cable work again, had his uniform on, went into the house. I don't believe there was any robbery involved. He was just a really evil person. His father came home, I believe it was for lunch later.
Oh my God.
And was the one to find her. And, Travis was crying in his crib. And his father's, as just this wonderful, super positive person and what he had to find and what he lived through there. And it's just inconceivable, really. And she was I believe, like a couple months pregnant as well. So obviously baby didn't survive there. So the same man that did that went on 2 months later to murder another woman.
Oh my God.
In the same way. And they were able to catch him 8 years after Tally, who's Travis's mother, her murder. They caught him using DNA evidence. They convicted him of murder. He was sentenced to death for her murder. He had also, in like 1994, I think, he had tried to abduct a woman in a Tulsa parking lot. Tulsa's like a different part of Oklahoma at knife point and tried to force her back in her car to abduct her. And she fought him off. She actually received like really nasty knife wounds through like her neck and hands, I believe, but was able to fight him off because it was in a Walmart parking lot in the early morning hours. And he is a bad guy. But yes, he drove off, but they were able to catch him and he had blood on his hands from that attack. So he had gotten life in prison. So he was already in prison at the time.
Yeah.
That they started suspecting him, they were able to connect him to the other two murders via DNA. So then he got the death penalty for Tally's case and was sentenced to death, I think, in 2007.
Good.
And he's gone. But there's that question in my mind of whether he, did more.
I was gonna say, did he?
Yeah,
I mean,
sure. I'm fucking sure.
Unless he that was like his first one and he just started off on a thing, but I doubt it.
I'm saying because it was 8 years. There was 8 years in between.
There was about 8 years in between, and he had gone between. He had lived in like Texas. I think he kind of fled down to Texas because the second woman that he murdered was actually like a neighbor of his, and so he got a little bit of heat on that one. Although they weren't able to pin it on him, but I think he got nervous on that, and then went back down to Texas, came back up, moved around in Oklahoma. So, he made the rounds of that. I don't really know if there's any evidence out there to tie him to anything, but I wonder personally, it keeps me up at night.
It's like a serial killer.
Legit, yeah. What year was that?
Travis's mother was murdered in, I believe, 1987.
Okay.
And that was, I think, February of 1987 that she was murdered. And the other woman was murdered in May of 1987. Mm-hmm. And then the woman that was abducted or attempted abduction in the Tulsa parking lot was, I think it was like September of 1994.
Okay.
So there was quite a big gap in between, and yeah, he was a really, really evil guy.
You know what we haven't said is his name, and we're not gonna because he's a piece of shit.
He doesn't even deserve that. If anybody really wants to look it up, I'm sure you can figure it out. But yeah, he
trash.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I didn't bring enough things out here to throw.
I know. I'm like, right? Gabe needs to set a small fire or throw some shit across the room. So duck.
Yeah.
Alana's wearing a helmet.
So that's part of, the story of what, just hearing that. And, some of that dude. I researched on my own because it is, who wants to ask somebody about details like that? And who wants to talk about stuff like that, and for me, I just, I'd heard bits and pieces, and just putting together the story was just horrifying.
Right.
Of knowing that happened, and that happened not just to her, but to, another woman who I think her child was the one to find her.
Oh,
the other woman was.
The ripple effect of lives that are affected.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And that to me is that is the haunting, because it's not just the victim, it's the survivors. And there's so many other people that are way more affected by Travis's mother's, murder than I am. But Travis and I got engaged back in February. The wonderful, bright future of wedding planning in the next year with coronavirus, everything. But just that feeling, that gap, that hole of like wishing that his mother was, there to be with us, and that I knew her, because I think I see parts of her like in him, and I hear stories about her, but we'll never get that opportunity to meet her, and really Travis never really got that opportunity to know her because he was only 8 months old. Oh. And, and the ripple effects of that, just feeling kind of that hole of somebody taken that she just wasn't meant to die then. And somebody took her life, and fate went a different way with everything. But it just feels like that injustice of like somebody else took a life that that this person's supposed to be living right now.
So fucking sick.
It makes me really angry. I'm glad, not everybody agrees with the death penalty and everything. And,
I'm glad he's dead.
I don't feel sad at all that he's dead, and that wasn't even my mother. I can't imagine.
I heard about it 5 minutes ago, and I'm like, fuck that guy. I'm glad he's dead. I hope he can get killed twice.
Yeah.
I hope he woke up and then they had to kill him again.
Yeah. I hope he wanted KFC as his last meal, and they were like, oh my god, they're closed. Too bad. Something else.
And he's like, no.
Yeah. I feel like with people, good people, when they're taken out of the world, the world's a little bit less of a brighter place, by taking out that bright light. And he was a spot of darkness. So I really think the world's just a little bit better probably without him, in my opinion.
Balance that shit out.
I think it would be sounds like it's a lot better. A good amount better.
Yeah.
Fuck that guy.
Fuck that guy.
So that's part of, the story. And I think that's what really drives me is seeing that other side, seeing the side of like the family members, because even with her case being solved and ultimate, justice being done, there's still that feeling, Travis will never know what it would have been like, with his mother, all the family members and everything else, and the ripple effect. And that's with it solved. When it's unsolved and you have all that, I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
And there's people living that. They don't know the answers, like they're like, why did this happen to my loved one? Who did this? And some of them die without knowing. And it's just, it breaks my heart. And that's kind of what drives me to help in whatever way I can. And I don't really have the illusion that I'm going to actually help solve a murder, but at least to get people talking about it again, the murder, missing people.
I mean, the more aware people are of stuff, information might come out, or like, hopefully.
At least and then I think it also just helps the family members, like it gives them something. If I have like a little write-up on Facebook, they can share it on their page. They might not be a writer, they might not be able to piece it together because it's so emotional for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
to be able to do that cohesively, and
giving
then
them a
they can just share it,
voice.
Yes. Be
And-
their voice, Alanna.
Yeah,
Oh.
I do my best, and I wish I had time to do more, and I that's kind of why I'm going to school for journalism, so I can have that time at a job to do what I want to do. It's hard to give it the time I want to in between, when I get home from work and everything. So that's kind of the story of behind it, what's brought me here to this point.
Yeah, this is a hell of a hobby.
Yeah,
Like,
shit.
it's very time consuming. You're like, instead of like, oh, I'm going to take up painting, you're like, I'm going to help solve murders.
I I didn't get into it there, and then all of a sudden it just started like snowballing. There's some other cases that really have made a big difference and inspire me. And I also I forgot to mention, there was in Travis's mother's case, Tally's case, there was a really dogged detective that had helped put all the pieces together and was just this wonderful, wonderful guide to the family. He would call them, touch base with them, and even still he would call on birthdays.
Wow.
Every year he'd talk with Travis's grandma, just recently passed away, but he would talk with her, she was Tally's mother. He'd still call her, and they were still in contact, and she just thought the world of him. Just people like that try their very best and do whatever they can to help get justice. It's very inspiring to me. It wouldn't have happened without that hard work or that extra effort. Yeah, Steve Lucas is the detective that did that.
What
So
up,
I'll give
Steve?
Get it, Steve.
Shout out to Steve. So he's invited to the wedding.
So you brought us a cold case today that you
I did.
wrote about that's still cold.
It is still cold, yes. It's still
Yeah.
unsolved, and we wrote about it on our group. It's the story of Danny Myles. It's one that really touched my heart when I had written about it for the group. And his sister had reached out to me and asked me to write a story about her brother. That's kind of where I got started. I'd never heard of it before. This one is super, super buried. Those are the cases that are like, they don't even get real articles devoted to them, and it just breaks my heart. I just try to be as accurate as possible just because I think that helps the case.
For sure.
To make sure you're not putting disinformation out on it, because little details can make a big difference. He was only 17 when he was murdered out in Carruthers, California, which is kind of a central California town. It's essentially like a suburb of Fresno, but it's pretty rural. There's a lot of vineyards there. So, yes, he was only 17 years old. He was a high school student.
What year was this?
This was in 1979. So this was June 4th, 1979.
Okay.
He was murdered. And he was found out in a vineyard, and he had been shot twice in the back of the head, and he had been brutally sexually assaulted as well.
Jesus.
There's not a ton of details on the murder, kind of like whether he was found unclothed, whether there was a lot of evidence nearby. From everything that I was able to gather, he had really fought his attacker off very hard. He had a lot of skin found underneath his fingernails. We don't know if they have a rape kit. We don't know how well the fingernail clippings and scrapings have been preserved. We don't really know that much if they have any other evidence. They didn't seem to share a ton of information with the family to start with, unfortunately, and there's really not much communication at all going on right now from what Danny's sister Marita has told me. She's tried to email and call them and the detective in the case and stopped hearing back from them a while ago. So it's, she's been very frustrated with that and just feeling like, that her brother's been forgotten about.
Yeah.
And she's not forgotten him. They grew up and they were really, really close with each other. Marita shared that, their family was very low income and poor, and they would work in the vineyards together picking grapes to help make ends meet for their family and to also, buy themselves like school clothes and stuff like that. So they got to spend a lot of time together doing that, and it's good memories for her. And that's been really difficult for her because she was really close with her brother. He was murdered in such a brutal way. And then all these years later, I think it's 41 years since.
Oh my God.
Still no answers. There's no making it better because at the end of the day, justice won't bring you back your loved one.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's the bare minimum least that somebody gets justice for their loved one or knows what happened to them. Or if they're missing, has their body to bury, like has some closure in that sense. And it's inhumane in a way. It's inhumane for these people to like have to live their whole lives and just not know, and not have even that little semblance of closure. That's not even full closure. It's good when the truth is out and that, people that could maybe harm other people are off the streets. families, so that more families don't have to feel that way. And you know, I think in Danny's case, there's certainly a chance that whoever murdered him and raped him did it again. And if this person wasn't caught, is maybe still out there, probably pretty old right now, but who knows what age they were. There was a lot of serial killers that Danny would fit their victim profile, operating within that part of mainly Southern California, but he's kind of like Caruthers is in like central, sort of like central, a little bit Southern California.
The 70s for serial killers in the Pacific Northwest and California were like a hotbed.
It was certainly a hotbed, and right over there, you know, there was two very prolific serial killers operating within that time period: William Bonin, the freeway killer, and then there was Randy Kraft, the scorecard killer, also known as well as the freeway killer. Just to make things really confusing.
Scorecard killer?
Scorecard killer.
Oh.
That was Randy Kraft. Both targeted victims within the age range that Danny would have been. Both were operating within the time frames. Randy Kraft was, I think, between like 1972 and 1983. He was killing. I know William Bonin has 14 confirmed boys that he had raped and murdered.
Jesus Christ.
Fuck.
And I think Randy Kraft he's got like 16 boys and young men that were confirmed victims, but both are suspected of many, many more. I think William Bonin is suspected of like 44 or potentially more. And Randy Kraft is like anywhere between possibly 51 and like even 70. And William Bonin, his first confirmed kill was 2 months later. So, you know, it could have evolved or changed.
Right.
You know, he wasn't entire, like we don't have confirmed evidence that either was operating in like Caruthers there or even in Fresno, but it's not that far away. You know, there was traveling. So it's certainly in my mind a possibility.
For sure.
You know, and I think they're both varied their styles. Randy Kraft would sometimes torture victims horribly and sometimes would just rape and murder them. So those are two possible suspects. I don't know if there's really anything to fully tie them. I think if I were the detective in charge of the case, I'm sure there's other more viable suspects that maybe are closer, you know, to the victim. But, you know, it was a really brutal crime. So certainly could have been perpetrated by, you know,
somebody who had done it before.
Previously, yes. Yeah. Or was looking to get their a thrill kill out of it, you know, where they enjoyed not only the act of the sexual assault, but also the act of killing. I think there's multiple suspects. I don't think there's one that really stands out. It certainly could have been somebody that knew him. You know, I think that the whole like serial killer, that's just a whole other side tangent because there is no released name of a suspect in Danny's case. So there's not anything for me to really glob onto in that, but there's certainly, and even his sister didn't really have any like solid. She had a couple names that she'd thrown out, but it was really just
speculation.
Yeah. And even she was kind of like, I don't know how well his case, you know, how hard it was worked, you know, and there's sometimes a lot of times there is stuff happening behind the scenes. Police don't release details. Yeah. Even to the family because it's just, you know, that's part of the way they're conducting their investigations. So there might have been like really solid suspects that they never released the names of, and I don't even know about it, you know? And so this is kind of being on the other side of everything I can see from my research and just not fully knowing it because she hasn't been able to be in contact with the detective. You know, she's not really updated on where the status of that investigation is. So
God, what the fuck?
It's still like every day for her. She still lives it with her brother because she misses him. You know, she's said to me, like, if I wish I could just unbury my brother and like have him back with me because I miss him every day. And she prays about the case like every day. And even then, I think
41 years.
41 years. She just wants to know before she dies what happened to her brother and know that some sort of justice could maybe be served. You know, whether this person was already in jail, you know, they caught him because he killed other people, or whether, you know, the person's already dead and they, you know, just to have like a name of the killer, just something, you know, because otherwise just like every day, you know, she doesn't have her brother, she doesn't have answers. It's just a raw deal. So the last thing I wanted to talk about with Danny's story is, you know, I think we touched on earlier is that there is a real person behind these stories, and I try to add some little details, you know, to kind of make that real. And so, you know, some things about Danny is that he loved participating in Civil War reenactments, which was kind of a cool thing. Like, but yeah, that was something he really loved doing, and I think, just maybe
That's
a fun
adorable.
way. Yeah, you get all, dressed up, and I thought that was a really cool detail to kind of bring, some of who he was to help visualize that. And then he had dreams someday to move to Kansas out there. So that's kind of what he wanted to do, I think, shortly after he would have graduated, and then find a job out there. So I'm not sure why he liked Kansas so much, but
I'm not sure either.
Maybe he went through there before and like traveled there, and, something out there. Maybe, they do probably a lot of ranching out there. I'm not sure what Kansas has going on, but, maybe he liked that part of it. So that was something.
Meanwhile, in Kansas, everybody's like, California someday.
Yeah, right? So he really loved Christmas, and him and Marita.
So does Tasha.
I love Christmas.
I love Christmas too. So I identify. My mom loves Christmas too.
I hate it.
Yeah, Travis hates it as well.
It.
When
He
we're
hates
done,
Christmas.
Alana and I are going to do a Baby It's Cold Outside duet. Anyway, keep going.
Okay, we'll put that on. We'll stick it on the end. And so him and Marita would pick out a Christmas tree every year together, and that was kind of like a fun thing that they do to celebrate. She impressed upon me multiple times that like he was a wonderful brother. He was just like the best brother to her, and just a good person. And there's a group, Justice for Danny Myles, on Facebook, but there's only about 300 people in there, so they could use as much support as possible just to get some more people talking about it. I still think it's very interesting. I mean, things like Danny's story that gets me, because I'm like, God, how is this not solved? They probably still have the fingernail scrapings, like what DNA, all this stuff. This is like a great time for that, and we see all these developments, and I think his sister thinks to herself, like, why is Danny's case not one of these breaking new cases?
And so much of it is, I'm not saying this is the situation there, because obviously I don't know, but so much can be just having to do with bringing awareness to detectives and whoever's handling it, for them to go, oh yeah, we should go run this. And it's getting that in front of the right people for it to be opened up and to be addressed again.
Yes, because unfortunately right now it seems like that communication channel between the family and the detectives right now is a little bit hindered or broken, but I think Marita is trying to find some ways, and on our end we'll try to step it up, where maybe we can make some calls to the detective, because we have the number, and she had shared with me that her and Danny had grown up poor, and she did feel like that from the beginning or early on in the case that it had been pretty neglected by police or investigators and the media as well. She felt it might have something to do with them being lower income, and having where they, and even just the fact that they didn't have the financial resources to like hire a lawyer, to put that pressure on police departments or the media, or have the connections to be able to like get it on the news or, more often. And that was,
God, that fucking sucks.
troubling. Yeah. It's sad.
It's 100%.
Shouldn't have to have money to help solve your loved one's brutal murder. And I can't really speak to, exactly what went on or how things were worked, whether they were doing it in
Oftentimes, socioeconomic disparity is a factor in whether a case gets a lot of attention or not. It's just
And I see that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt the same way with Danny's case too. Is like, there's just that, like, where is the information? Like, where are the articles? Like, this is a horrible crime. Why is nobody covering it? I hope I can do better justice to like all different types of victims and all, and not just repeat and regurgitate the same story. I don't think that those cases are any less important than this, but just like, if you could have a little bit of sharing, that would be great, of the spotlight. And maybe we can do good for all these cases.
Yeah.
So, to get it out there. One way you could help is to send an email to the detective of the case, or even call the Fresno County Sheriff's Department. So if that's something that you feel called to do, just to maybe put it on their mind a little bit more, because I do think that if they still have that evidence, we could solve this. The email for the detective is John, so Jon, no H in there, .Alvarado, ALVARADO at fresnosheriff.org.
You say that one more time.
Sure. It's John, Jon .Alvarado, ALVARADO at fresnosheriff.org.
Awesome.
And that is his.
Make sure you spell sheriff right, because I never do.
Sure.
I know. I was like, maybe
SHERIFF.
Okay, I always put two R's.
SHERIFF.
Barrel and sheriff, I can't spell.
If it comes back to you, I'm sure if the email bounces back, we'll have it written out too on maybe the email template as well.
You could put $100 bill on the table and ask me to spell restaurant, and I'm not making $100.
Okay.
I can't either.
I wouldn't chance it.
I'm like, why is there
autocorrect.
you?
Right.
Like, why is there a fucking you in here?
Where does it go? Guarantee.
I know.
I identify with both of those. Having issues.
Oh, and want to do the
Sharing-
phone number too, just in case?
Oh, yeah. Do you have the phone number?
Yes, for the Fresno County Sheriff.
Yes.
I won't give you the detective's direct line, although you may be able to find it within the comments of the post on Danny that we had made.
Check it out.
If you really want it. Fresno County Sheriff is 559.
I'm sorry.
You thought you were going to say 555?
I thought you were just going to give us a 555 number, and I'm like, are you fucking trolling me? Sorry. Go ahead. 559.
559 600 8400.
559 600 8400.
Don't be a
Just
jerk.
to shed some light.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to show, like, hey, we're,
People are paying attention, and
Yeah.
this needs to get
we
looked
would
at.
love to see this solved, essentially.
So we'll have a template for you to be able to send an email to the detective that is in charge of Danny Myles' case. Join Alanna's Facebook group if you're interested in helping solve buried cold cases, if you're interested in learning more about them, or or if you need help with something yourself, or just to support the families and people looking for support in those places. Follow us on Instagram at SVUpod. Send us an email, svupod@gmail.com,
Follow us on Facebook.
and join our Facebook group.
Yeah.
Subscribe, rate, review, be nice. We love you. Thank you so much, Alanna.
Yeah, thank you.
We
Thank
really
you, guys.
super appreciate you coming.
Hey, thank you guys so much for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah.
Really appreciate it, and thanks for listening to all my stories here, and thanks for letting me feature Danny's case. Just appreciate any way that we're able to get stuff out, because I think any extra ear that's hearing about it is helpful. So
And we weren't lying about your fart noise. It was
I was
great.
just going to say
thank
that.
you,
It was really
I
cute.
was just going to say that we appreciate.
thank you for giving me my
Your-
fart noise confidence back. I don't know.
Don't
what I
you
would've
ever
done
lose
without
that
it.
shine.
Thank you.
Okay.
See you later.
Love you. Bye.
Bye.
Update. When we recorded last week, the Buried Cold Cases Facebook group, Alanna's group, was at 85,000 members, and as of today, it's at 93,000 and growing.
I joined it. There's some shit that I never even heard of it, or it's insane.
I don't know if we say it enough times in this episode, but join that group.
Yeah.
Buried Cold Cases.
Yeah.